Delhi is a space of several cultures, economies, undercurrents, and histories coexisting. And in our next session, we have a heritage conservationist and historian, a writer and humanities scholar and linguist, and an ecologist look at Delhi as a continuing space from the perspectives of tangible, intangible, and natural histories. For this session, please join me in welcoming Aman Nath, who is a historian by education and the co-author of 14 illustrated books on art, history, architecture, corporate biography, and photography, two of which have won national awards. Changing Skylines, his latest book, is a corporate and family history of the Shapoorji Pallonji Group, one of India's largest building conglomerates. Aman Nath is involved in the restoration of India's unlisted architectural ruins and now run as the 28 Neemrana non-hotel hotels, which have won awards from UNESCO, the Indian travel trade industry, and national awards. He was also the curator of Art Today, the Gallery of India Today. As an inveterate traveler, he regularly contributes to travel magazines. Please join me in welcoming him. Ayesha Kidwai is professor at Center for Linguistics, JNU. A recipient of the Infosys Prize 2013 in Humanities, she is a theoretical linguist who studies the morphology and syntax of lesser-known Indian languages. She is also a women's rights activist who focuses on gender-based violence in university spaces and has been actively associated with JNU Gender Sensitization Committee against sexual harassment. In Freedom's Shade, her translation of Anis Kidwai's Urdu memoir of the partition of India and Pakistan was shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award in 2012. She is currently engaged in researching the role of social workers in the recovery of abducted women during the partition. Please join me in welcoming her. Vijay Dhasmana works in the field of forest conservation and ecological gardening, with special emphasis on the flora of Aravali range. His role was pivotal in the rewilding of the Aravali Biodiversity Park, Gurgaon, and creating Wildflower Trail in the Binsar Wildlife Sanctuary, Uttarakhand, to showcase the wild flora of the sanctuary. He is also the ecological gardening consultant to Friends for Change program of Walt Disney, which plans to create 10 native plant gardens in NCR every year. He is also working for the restocking of wilderness areas in Delhi NCR with native flora species. May I please request Vijay to come on stage? Please give him a huge round of applause. Now, the name that I have said a lot in the past 3.5 days, sort of looking for her every 2 minutes, Rizio Yohannan Raj is a writer, educationist, translator, and governance thinker. Her professional experience spans 2 decades of work in journalism, book publishing, academics, and institution building. She is the founder and executive director of Leela Foundation for Translocal Initiatives, a think tank engaged in multidisciplinary and intercultural knowledge production, dissemination, and conservation. Her works include collections of poetry, novels, critical volumes, edited works, research papers, and socio-cultural studies that have been published by HarperCollins, Cambridge University Press, Indiana University Press, Kendra Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, and journals and magazines across the world. She is also the creative director for ILF Samanvay 2015. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good evening, friends. We have come to the close of ILF Samanvay 2015. This is a very, I'm actually now sitting here after the first day. I'm looking at you and, this is a kind of illusory field, I guess, because, you get a feeling that there are a lot of people. So you get some kind of a sense of satisfaction. Okay, there are a lot of heads that you can see around, etc. But I think these 4 days have been tremendous for us. Like, we are a very small team, and we've come to the last session. I will just contextualize this particular session for you, and also tell you why this session is the last session of ILF Samanvay 2015. and then ask my panelists to speak. This is very important for us because when we started conceptualizing this whole festival, the way you see it now, like some 3 months back, there are 3 things that we thought we should look at. One was to look at language beyond the verbal and the literary. The second thing was to look at this theme of insider, outsider in a very, very, you try to analyze it, you try to look at various aspects of that theme. The third thing was Delhi. We thought it was very important that the Habitat Center is hosting this festival, a democratic forum. Those who have attended this festival through these 4 days would know, like, this is actually a very rare kind of forum. We are all really blessed that we can sit here, talk about things without fear, without getting intimidated. So this is that kind of a space. In the heart of Delhi, when we are talking about intolerance, when we are talking about so many other ills, we are also created, this is the heart of the city, and we have created a space, we are accessing a space where we can talk about these things, fearlessly. So I think Delhi offers you that kind of a space, even with all its vices. We thought it was very important that we bring Delhi into the discourse that we are in at Isle of Saman. So we thought there are 3 aspects of Delhi that because we are actually looking at the space as a think space. The logo, which is here, reconceptualized, tells you that this is actually a think space. This is the thought space. So we thought it is very important that we end this, all the things that we were discussing led to thinking about the city that we are living in, and city which is hosting this festival. So we thought we have to look at 3 aspects of this city. One is its tangible heritage, like how has the city been built over a period of time? How has its landscape changed? How does it look? The buildings that we have done over a period of time, how has it affected the looks of the city? How has it affected the mindscape of people, etc.? That is one thing that we wanted to look at. Second thing was the intangible aspects of the city. This is a city where people from different parts of the country and the world come together. It's a kind of melting pot. We talk about Bombay as a melting pot, but I think Delhi is a different kind of melting pot. So there is this a huge influx of various languages, various linguistic cultures coming into the city all the time. So we wanted to look at how those overlaps, those currents are affecting the contemporary life in the city. So that intangible linguistic cultural aspect of the city, we wanted to look at that heritage and where we are heading in that direction. The third part was like we always, all the time we talk about Delhi, its pollution, and this is one of the most polluted cities in the world, and things like that. So we thought it is very important to look at the environmental aspects of the city, the natural heritage of the city. We have a water problem. We all the time talk about these issues, like, but what are we, where are we heading in that direction? And also, when we talk about urban reforestation or planting trees, etc., is it possible? Is planting trees a homogeneous kind of activity? Like, can we plant just about any tree in any place? There are things that we have to really look at. So we thought we will invite 3 people who have been engaged, deeply engaged, thinking about these three aspects of the city, the tangible, the intangible, and the natural heritage of the city. So we have Aman, Nath, Ayesha, Kidwai, and Vijay, Dhasmana with us. So I wouldn't take much time. I'll only facilitate the conversation. So they will, the plan that we have is each one of them will speak because they have certain things to say about these things from their experience. So they will, each of them will speak first, and then I would actually like them to have a conversation, because our major intention is to make conversations across disciplines possible. So that is also one of the intentions of why we are bringing people from different disciplines together on a stage. So I would like to actually listen to how they would like to engage with one another, you know, how they are discussing these things among themselves. So I would first like to invite Aman. You can, and then we can.
I think it's very important to talk about tangible heritage, because when all of us are gone from having lived our lives, I think that which physically remains are those buildings in which we have inhabited and enacted our drama. And the fact that India is a continuously living civilization, we have so much confidence in the present that we've never really bothered with building or restoring the past. In the West, because the civilizations have declining birth rates and so on, so I would call them dead or dying civilizations. So they're hanging on to their past in museums, in restoration and so on, because there's no continuity of that. And in India, because we have this overconfidence, we disregard the past, which is also a shortcoming. But this is an Indian, so since we are talking about Delhi, I thought I would first just begin by telling you that when people say Delhi has had many cities, in all the literature and all the speeches even given by chief ministers of Delhi, so on, we always say that Delhi has 7 cities. Or Delhi has had 7 cities. I've studied history, and I know both by date and by name that Delhi has had 12 cities, and New Delhi was the 13th. So the very fact that we don't even know if we have had 7 cities or 12 cities shows the complete disregard for the physical. And I thought, since this is being listened to by a few people and perhaps recorded for more people, I actually brought the list, because I don't remember it by heart, because I went to college 100 years ago, I think. So there's Indraprastha to begin with, then there's Delhi, then there's Lal Kot, then there's Kila Rai Pithora, Kilokri, Siri, Tughlaqabad, Jahanpana, Firozabad, what is this one? Deenpana, Shergarh, Shah Jahanabad, that makes 12, and New Delhi is the 13th. And New Delhi was the imperial Delhi. So actually there are now 14th Delhi and a 15th Delhi. So actually there are many more Delhis than we imagine. And should there be, should Delhi have the fate of many of the cities which were destroyed, God knows what the future holds for us. And the destructive mode that mankind is in, that there will be so many more layers that will come out should excavations ever be made. When I was studying history, there was a story which I read or was told, I don't remember now, but it's an interesting story, and I thought rather than make it very academic and boring, I think it's important to share stories that shape your life or change your ideas. And this story is about the Taj Mahal, which I did studied for my master's in medieval Indian history. And there's a story that the Taj Mahal, we all know, cost a lot of money, and the Mughal treasury was almost depleted. But after the Taj Mahal was made, Shah Jahan had the idea that the grave of Mumtaz Mahal would be covered with a chadar of Basra pearls. So I don't know how many million Basra pearls were got, and they're very, very difficult to pierce because they are so small that they say that if you thread them, you can almost go blind if you do it too long. So the most amazing jali work, a chadar of Basra pearls was produced to cover the grave, which cost almost as much as the Taj Mahal, or so they say. And Shah Jahan by this time was then under house arrest in Agra fort, and his sons were going to enact that battle of succession, and that's what happened. When he died, the two brothers ran to the Taj Mahal to take charge of this chadar because it was so valuable, and in the battles that were going to ensue, they would have had to pay their armies and so on. So Dara Shikoh and Prince Khurram, Aurangzeb then, actually reached the Taj Mahal at the same time. They grabbed his chadar and battled to take possession of it. And as is custom, that when two emperors' children fight, no third person can actually interfere because it's a battle between equals. So in the garden of the Taj Mahal, they fought over this chadar and tore it to bits because it was actually a fragile and delicate pearl chadar. And all the pearls were strewn in the garden. So if you have 5 million pearls strewn in a garden, who got them and what became of them, they were completely lost. And I actually remember being very impressed by this story, to know that actually, you know, when you say I have the Kohinoor diamond, it goes to the richest person, the most powerful person, it can move hands, it might move hands again. But a building doesn't move hands so easily. So if you have something of great value, let's say the pyramids, of course some of those were also moved because of circumstance, because lakes were made, and the countries that helped Egypt to do what its development work actually took some of his treasures away, and they had so many that they didn't really have value for them. So I think from this story we should remember that the structural architectural heritage of a place sits where it is built, and no matter whether you're rich or poor, the dynasty lives and dies. You know, the Sayyids and Lodhis made Delhi a city of tombs because they made more tombs than palaces and forts. But they have gone. But when we walk the Lodhi gardens, they're amazing octagonal tombs which are slanted, live on. So I think it's very important. So I think that the physical aspect, I was just trying to do a homely analysis of whatever my understanding of this is. There is, of course, the physical sprawl. You know, something is built here and then it spreads, like the cities of Delhi have spread. Then, if something is destroyed, like in the Purana Killa, you know, they've done excavations because it was by the Jamuna River, and when it flooded, some civilizations vanished, and they found excavations which are rather ancient, even from prehistoric times. Then there is destruction, like it happened at the Qutub Minar. You know, the 28 Jain and Hindu temples were destroyed, and the Quwwatul Islam mosque was made. So there are things below. There may be things below. Then there is restoration, which we do for listed buildings, which the Archaeological Survey has done for many of the buildings of Delhi. And many more need that kind of help. A building like the Khane Khana's tomb, for example, when the planning of Nizamuddin East was done, they didn't even leave a char bagh around the Khane Khana's tomb. 2 or 3 houses are actually built within that garden. Imagine if, you know, they were a colony of in Agra, which was built in one quarter of the char bagh in Taj Mahal, and nobody has the conviction, the courage, and the motivation to call a spade when something is wrong. You know, people can be relocated, you know, excavations can be done, And when the Jews have made these amazing museums, the Holocaust museums, I mean, you know, it's something we could never do in India because we are so busy pleasing everybody because everybody is a vote bank. I mean, it would be quite extraordinary to build. Somebody has done research on it, and I saw a short film somebody made on what the area of the Qutub Minar would have been before the destruction happened. No one is talking about breaking it and doing what the Babri Masjid incident is, what has happened in the past when the thinking was different, medieval and so on. But it's important to tell history right so that people are cautioned, so that people are also made aware of the dangers of what they should do and should not do. So when you come to New Delhi, we give a lot of credit to Edwin Lutyens for doing designing New Delhi. But if you go through, I did a book called Dome Over India on the making of New Delhi from an Indian perspective, not just to the glory of the British, because they were building this capital primarily because they had an eternal complex that London was not Paris. So in all the correspondence, they're comparing, they're saying the Champs-Élysées is so many meters wide, therefore the King's Way, which is now Rajpath, should be little wider because Versailles is so many square feet, therefore the Viceroy's house is bigger and so on. And in 1931, when the Rashtrapati Bhavan was actually completed and they had a housewarming party, they drank French champagne, all the fountains played and there were fireworks, and on that wonderful pedestal where the steps rise up, Lord Irwin stood, and when he said cheers, and he said, "This is what Versailles must have looked like." So actually they were not interested really at least at that point in what monument was there. They have just treated our monuments like little follies, you know, you would go to a tribal place and not honor their gods and their trees and whatever, and just say, oh, they worship this, so let's put this on a circle, not knowing that you've broken the continuity of the passage of rites of worship or whatever, you know. Even in Nizamuddin, for example, where I stay, the Dargah has a direct road which goes through the Arab Ki Sarai, and where they made an industrial training institute at the beginning, which led to the main gate of Humayun's tomb, which is now shut, which is the southern gate, and a side gate has been opened, and everything has been prettified, and Lord Curzon made a round garden, which the Aga Khan Foundation has now brought back to how it should have been. And it's very interesting because how long can I speak? A few more minutes, yes. When this Sikh Gurdwara, Sisganj, was being, when they were laying out New Delhi, there's a whole lot of correspondence. They don't know the difference between a Gurdwara, a temple. So they're saying there is a Sheikh's temple there. Sheikh, because the Sheikh was a Sikh actually. So they turned the Sikh into a Muslim and made a Muslim have a temple. So they are saying, so shall we shut its gate here? Shall we open the gate from the back? They are not really concerned with it today because for God knows what reason we want to glorify Lutyens. And when they were naming the city, they said New Delhi is being made, and another Delhi is being made, and there was a lot of debate on it. And like the sycophants that exist today who want to name everything after this prime minister or that prime minister, there was a lot of correspondence. They say, shall we call this, because George and Mary were the rulers at that point, shall we call it George Garh? Shall we call it Mary Bad? And then, the emperor and the queen empress said, let it be, there's Delhi, let's just call it New Delhi. They had the sense to call it New Delhi. And we, in that eternal complex of being colonized, had no sense to now start calling it Lutyens Delhi for no reason, because he was, when the Red Fort was made by Makaramat Khan, it's not called Makaramat Khanabad, So, and the British didn't think it was honorable, and Lutyens was a man who hated India, hated Indians, and if you read his correspondence, he was a colonial. You would get to despise him because he says Indians stink, that we have a vile mind, that our food stinks, that our workmen have broken thumbs, the ones who produced the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which he didn't build himself. And we have the sense to call this Lachan's bungalow zone, in which Lachan's has not even made one single bungalow. He made only 3 bungalows, which are inside Rashtrapati Bhavan in the President's estate. So ignorance of history is amazing. That, you know, anybody comes, the British Council does an exhibition, and you say how great Edwin Lutyens was, and we go on. So I think that is very important. My work is more, I have not been able to restore anything in Delhi, because Delhi is very fiercely possessed by different bodies. There are listed buildings, and there are no unlisted buildings, because all the Lal Dora areas have crawled into them, knocked them down, and live in them. So someday when more sense will dawn upon the city of Delhi to track back its footprint, I think there will be room for retaining more of our physical heritage and taking our excavations very seriously and telling the true story of history. There is no danger in telling the truth. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. We're going to be talking today we're talking in Delhi, and in a country which has over 1,652 languages, because the distinction between a mother tongue and a language is purely a political distinction, not something that we learn in our homes. And I want to ask the question about Delhi. What are the languages of Delhi? Because if I look at the people around me, I look within myself, I don't speak only one language. But in the history of cities, in the history of civilization, we name them by just one language. So certainly, I mean, I think in the languages on this dais here, there are at least 2 to 3 to 4 per person. So why doesn't multilingualism ever write its own history? Why do we not see Delhi or any city that we have lived in or any space that we occupy as being multilingual? If we look at the question of the issue of Delhi in particular, there's a lot of romanticism of the past. And so the ruling image of this historical Delhi, certainly of the last 200 years, is a city doubly marked by the dazzle and the cavort of the poetic word, and the deadly glint of swords and bayonets, and very alluring secular culture woven for us now by the magic of language and beautiful buildings. And this is both an aspired to ideal and always permanently, simultaneously very, very fragile, so that every act you do really constitutes and reconstitutes that popular imaginary. For the last 200 years at least, Urdu is considered to be the spoken language of the city, an idiom that threads and weaves together the lanes and by-lanes of this city with its narrow gully kuche, right? For many, at least for 200, 300 years, this is a city that will not let you leave. So as Zauq said in the 18th century, "Par kaun jaye Zauq, ye Dilli ki galiyan chhodkar." So who can leave Zauq, leaving these beautiful, these narrow by-lanes of Delhi? For many of us, I think, this vision of Delhi's past, provides a refuge from this vituperative climate of intolerance, communalism. So it's an ideal that we look for. We want that kind of Delhi. Right? But the fact of the matter is that if you put together my brief opening comments and this, that we have to have an image, the secular imaginary of Delhi, which is even more inclusive, where the people who don't constitute are not constituted in terms of just religion alone, but also language and the fact that they commanded these many languages, if we want this vision to really constitute something which is a powerful instrument for the future. Okay. There can be no doubt that never, ever in the history of the world and the history of any city and the history of any community, there has existed only one language. Many of the great Urdu poets themselves were, from our secular imaginary, were migrants themselves. They were from lands where of the Purabiya languages, Braj was spoken. And the Urdu they composed in bore the significant marks of these languages. In fact, that was their brilliance. Right? So if we could ask of the vision of our past and the vision of our future, not what is the language, what is the heritage of Delhi, but what are the languages of Delhi? What were the languages of Delhi that people spoke in the home, in the marketplace? I doubt that actually the answer would just be Urdu or Hindi or Punjabi or whichever city you're speaking about. A very different Delhi would then emerge, which would have not only people who made buildings or people who composed poems, but workers, artisans, writers, and in that these languages have inhabited the same self. So it wasn't this self that was an Urdu-speaking self that composed, that was also an Avdi and a Braj-speaking self. The truth seems to be that if we look back in the past, and I hope I'm completely wrong, but I think you need a different lens to be able to look at, we really cannot really describe the fact right now that there is, besides Farsi, which is the court language till the end of the 18th century, many other languages lived in Delhi. But if you look at the few historical records that I have looked at, and this is not something that I've yet worked on, but if you just do a cursory examination of what we have, let's say from 1857, from Mahmood Farooqi's translation of the book which is called Besiege, which is Voices from Delhi in 1857, you can see that there were Babu Bengalis, these are all listed in the mutiny papers, Jains from UP, and UP Kayas, Punjabi merchants, Gujjars, Jats, and there's a vast urban poor, and also, of course, the soldiers who were mutinying. Yeah. And there are people who are sons and daughters of people who are called Jakku and Duha. There are members of the Qaum Kori who were named Bhikari, Bilasia, and Mahangu. If we could find the history of these people, what are the languages they spoke in their home? They didn't speak Urdu in the marketplace. They didn't speak Urdu at home. Maybe many of them aspired to Urdu, but they didn't have it. So what were the public spheres, the social life? How did they come to understand farmans? How did they, when the police called them, what language did they give their statement in? Right? And how did news spread? What plays did they watch? And what songs did they sing? Right? Very likely, they equally owned Urdu, or as I said, aspired to it. But there was also English in that period. So many of us, even now and even 150 years ago, this is a very aspired so language. So there must have been some elites that spoke it, right? And spoke it well, or in their own idiom like we speak today. So beyond this chota, hazri, beer, sharab, and simkin. Simkin is very nice, it's champagne, right? That the colonial masters required of it. So if we look at the past, what we find is silence, right? Because neither the censuses of India nor any document collected by Imperial Delhi or our subsequent governments, our sovereign India, have ever recorded information about which speakers' languages lived in this city, which languages they spoke, to whom, when, where, and what about. Because that's the way our language, I'm speaking to you today in English. However, if I have a stomachache, I'm more likely to say, "Mera pet dard kar raha hai." And even though we know that they were there, because we know this from place names. So we know that very little, we might not even know the meanings of the names that these were their places. So places like Nangloi, Kucha Chelan, Bijwasan, Khari Bauli, Lado Sarai, Pul Bangas, Jhatika, and so many more actually. If you just look at the areas that Delhi has, where we just pass by, take a bus or a metro. We are like those Dilliwalas who can see, you know, the stains on Khuni, the blood stains on Khuni Darwaza, where Bahadur Shah Zafar's children were hanged. And as I grew up as a young kid, this was the most terrifying experience for me. I never went to Khuni Darwaza because I was so scared I would see the blood stains. So we are those people, the ones who have the blood stains inside. Now in this illusion of its multilingual past, this city is not at all unusual. Because places with rulers, courts, darbars, everywhere are much the same. Because the recognition of multilingualism is predicated on a recognition of multilinguality, of citizenship rights. And in the acknowledgement will lie democracy. New Delhi's birth and the places that we now live, in the popular imagination, again, become a place which is also simultaneously when partition happens, right? And slowly, not so slowly actually, very quickly, but over the next 5 years, Muslims left, Urdu also left. That is the assumption. And as New Delhi grew and Old Delhi somehow receded further and further, thanks to the metro, it's come closer again, right? Something changed in Delhi because, and this is what it's seen. I mean, there are various narratives about it. But what happened was at least the language that to define a city disappeared. Right? And this language was never replaced in the hearts of the city's denizens. Though there are thousands of people here, so in Delhi is well known for the fact that it's very rude. Everybody is being asked to speak in Hindi. Right? So if you're from South India, or if you're a Malayali, if you're a Santali, you cannot ask a question in pidgin without being humiliated. But that's not the language that actually lives in the heart of a person. That's an instrument of power. So what exactly happened in partition? It's actually, the tragedy is much more acute than the tragedy of Urdu. It is also the tragedy of Punjabi. In the Delhi that I was growing up, and I'm born 20 years after the partition, but you know, still wounds were fresh, and the wounds of language remain fresh all the time. So with the arrival of these battered, war-torn refugees from across the border, remember there were hardly any Muslim elites left in Delhi. But it was the people of Old Delhi who lamented that a strange Punjabi has come. The Aap Janab culture has been replaced by what they consider a tute meme culture. And this one narrative, at least when I was growing up, was that Delhi's culture was destroyed by the refugees, because the refugees, let's face it, got a very, very inhospitable and hostile welcome in our city. In a book that I translated, which is a memoir of 1947-48 called In Freedom's Shade, Anis Kidwai by my grandmother, actually already you can see that the linguistic history, in fact, in each individual is much more complex. So she talks about a Brahmin Zamindar Pandit Jaidev. He was a pure Delhiwala. He spoke a mix of the high language of Shahjahanabad and the Karkhandari dialect, which died, which was the Hindustani, if you want, the Urdu spoken in Karkhanas, right? And he wrote in the Persianized variety. So in this one self, and he was very clear that he was a Brahmin, there were 3 languages, right? There was a noble Swamiji who spoke some rustic Delhi tongue, and then there was a Muhammad Anis, one of the people who left behind, but his dress was Madrasi, right? And his language was pure Urdu. So that linguistic identities went along the lines of... The refugees he came were not Punjabi speakers either, actually. They all spoke they spoke Multani, at that point they spoke Balochi. They didn't understand each other, right? What you had then after partition was new languages came in, and old languages went away, but the new languages were not given a space and the old languages were showed up. What happened in this city was this city of the heart, Delhi. It's this perpetual gateway, which is why I guess it had 13 cities. And the word gateway is actually it's beautiful, so perhaps that's where our syncretic culture from. The word in Sanskrit is Dehali, and the word in Persian is Dehliz. So this perpetual gateway had to be envisioned anew. And the fact of the matter is that Delhi royally screwed up. It completely failed. Okay. So what was settled, and so people from Gujarat, I noticed, they say, I'm going to Delhi when they're speaking in English. But the Delhi walas always switch between Delhi and Delhi when they speak different languages. So this vaguely, sort of anglicized word, right, and really unrooted in any of the languages. This city of Delhi made no attempt to connect the languages of the people to the languages of governance, to the language of culture, to the languages of poetry, theater, etc. First, let's discuss the tragedy of Urdu. Do I have 5 minutes? Yeah? So if you look at the tragedy of Urdu, Urdu is a language for which there are, perhaps many, many thousands more mourners than there are speakers of the language. Because nobody actually really knew what it was to be an Urdu speaker. It was a high register that you used. Right? The only thing I want to draw your attention to is that to be an Urdu speaker, there is a very important, or writer at least, to be an Urdu writer, speaker, somebody who speaks the formal language, it was absolutely essential that you be multilingual. Because as I mentioned earlier, languages like Raj, etc., they actually enter the world of Urdu poetry. They create that intimacy. That's very important. Right? So to be able to really know, and perhaps best exemplified in poets like Ghalib, that in the great poetry in this language, the fullness of an effect of a turn of phrase lies in appreciating which language a word comes from, all the senses that the word has both within the language, that one language, and how it crosses over. Okay? So there's a very beautiful line from Ghalib, which लाग हो तो उसको हम समझें लगाव, जब ना हो कुछ भी तो धोखा खाएं क्यों. Now, lag and lagav, I will not bore you with the linguistic details. But lag is not a word that, which is from a Persianized variety. That's a good Khariboli word. What happened in Urdu was, by restricting and increasingly so, at least dealing with the pressure, I'm not saying that great poets have done that at all, but the pressure that you have to stick with the Perso-Arabic stock. You're really, and you're, by saying that you are monolingual speakers, Urdu can no longer be itself because it is by itself. A language that has to live in multilinguality. The tragedy of Punjabi is no less poignant, actually, because this never became fully one of the languages of the city. So there was an Arya Samaj movement in Punjab, which actually, even immediately after partition, Punjabi was not given the status of a full language. And in the movement in the Punjab, the Arya Samaj movement, where Punjabi Hindus were encouraged to speak, say that they spoke only Punjabi. What this meant was that Punjabi was not a language. This city mildly and quiescently accepted it. And what was said was that Punjabi is just a dialect of Hindi, that it lacks a real literature, that its script is terrible, so which is why Punjabi grew more and more Gurumukhi. But the people who came here, they were not literate in Gurumukhi. And in this one fell swoop, the bulk of the Punjabi refugees and the people who lived here were rendered illiterate in Delhi because it was the Hindi in the Devanagari script, which became the official language of the city. Right? So both the languages that crossed over and the languages that were crossed out by partition were killed in the moment of incredible rupture, I think. Moreover, Hindi itself was, Sanskritized. So it yielded, because this language had to be distinct, so more and more Persian Arabic words, which were really native words, right? They were removed from Hindi. It also affected Punjabi. Right? So in the process of expelling what was then considered, and is unfortunately still considered, the Pakistan within us, right, which hovers on our tongue, the consequence was that Punjabi speakers didn't have any means of actually learning this Hindi language of the city because the familiar words were also gone. I think it's not much known. Should I wind up? Yeah. It's not much known that the first time that Punjabi and Urdu became languages of the city was 2003. And that's why we have, and what does that mean? That you have, road signs which have names in them. And sometimes it doesn't even work because the Abul Kalam Azad Road, the Kalam Azad Road is still, I think at least till a month ago, the Urdu and the Punjabi still called it Alexandria Road. Okay. So what is the situation? How do we look ahead? Right. Maybe it was too late for Urdu and Hindi, but now it's Urdu and Punjabi, but things are never too late really. It depends on what we do with the time that we are living in. Right. Let's look at the facts of what we have. The only small figures that we have are from the 2001 census. Right. And Hindi speakers, people in the city, 81% of people say that their mother tongue is Hindi. Right. 7% claim Punjabi. About 6.3% say that they are Urdu speakers. 1.5% speakers are Bengali speakers because Bengalis will claim their language. They have very high language maintenance. They will claim it wherever they are. There were 91,000 Malayalam speakers in this. Nearly half a lakh Assamese speakers. And people, the vast uncounted, the people who all allegedly speak Hindi, but actually speak Bajjika, Angika, Maithili, Magahi, and Santali. So these are all. Yeah. Right. Just think, why do 81% speakers feel the need to say that they speak Hindi? This is not true of any other city in the country. Bombay, right, which is, we've seen very anti-North, anti-South movements for the last 50 years. Only 40% of the population says that it is Marathi speaking. A city like Delhi, where we know that 81% don't speak, it's because of this incredibly perversely monolingual perspective that Delhi speakers employ. That people have to disown the languages that they speak in, and then, of course, certainly write in, think in, dream in. So if Delhi is not to lose its future, and I'll take 2 minutes more, if Delhi is not to lose its future, it must be made more inclusive. It must recognize that it is multilingual, and that it is not only in the few languages of the elites, right, but in all the languages that are spoken here. Because poets and artists don't come only from the people who are the elites. What is needed, I think, is a government and a cultural bodies initiative which is going to, first of all, document. As we don't know how many people live here, we don't know what buildings are there, but we also want to know what are the languages that people speak. Encourage literature, theatre, and mass media of all the languages based on such surveys. Right? Include non-scheduled mother tongues, because there's a long history about this scheduled, non-scheduled business, as subjects of the curriculum. Create readers, create primers, make this something. There is absolutely no point in a Bengali-dominated slum to insist that there should be Hindi-based education alone. Okay. And most of all, I think, and because governments are not the only people who build, recognize multilingual, we must recognize it ourselves. So build a culture of tolerance and acceptance to allow people to speak and to be spoken to in Pidgin Hindi. Learn a few Malayalam words. To be able to do all this, we have to disengage as a city from the hegemonic politics of Hindi and the policy of Sanskritization. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I will not break the tradition of sitting and talking from there and come here. Well, I thought, we have Delhi, and Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, and whatnot. I thought my journey in Delhi is only 10 years old. So I can give you a perspective from an outsider's point of view, how I started seeing Delhi. So when so then I started living in the mountains and had to deal with Delhi, it being the powerhouse, it being the center of power, decision making and whatnot, intellectuals. So happened to come here, meet some nice people, really nice people, see large gardens here. Till then, it was still, something that I wanted to avoid. So mountains was beautiful, serene, no competition, just being. That was the ethos of the mountains. Here, it was rudeness. Here, it was, stark blow on your face as you stepped out of the train. So just by chance, it happened that I started working in Delhi. It was a very tough decision to come to Delhi. And I was offered a job at Wildlife Trust of India to lead their program on communities and conservation. So the condition was that all the projects are out of Delhi. You just have to be here. And so I saw a suitable place which was 200 meters from the office. So I could walk to the office and come back. And whenever I had to travel, So made a point that I travel as much as possible and not to be in Delhi. On my walk from the house to the office, I used to cross 2-3 gardens. And I started looking at the gardens. And it was everyday walk, every day, morning and evening. And I would see kachnar, which were now buds, then bigger bud, and then opening up, and then, becoming a flower, and then, the interaction with all kinds of butterflies to birds coming in, and then that flower wilting, and then fruit forming, and then watching that fruit becoming big, big, big and maturing, and then it's splitting. I saw all of it. And not just in Kachnar, I saw it in many plants. And I said, wow, you can actually appreciate nature anywhere, I had a grudge against Delhi. And in fact, I don't know if you know Bharat Dogra. So we used to meet in the mountains and he would ask me, where are you? I said, I'm for some time in Delhi. So he used to say, are you ashamed of Delhi? I said, I don't know, I'm ashamed of cities, yes. The city brings in a culture. And of course, I'm limited in my knowledge about the culture, about how societies are expanding. I had a concept of eco-village, or I was kind of trained into the idea of eco-villages, natural farming, and all of that. And here we have come to the stage of smart cities. And cities, for me, definitely are idea of fragmentation. They are not of union. Village is where it brings in together, the cultures bringing together and woven together into one sheet, into one chadar, if I may use the word. Whereas city is still fragmented. You have ghettos, you have I'm talking about modern cities. I don't know how Delhi was 100 years back or 200 years back. I know the natural history of Delhi for sure, how it was. And that, so I started exploring the gardens of Delhi, understanding different, and I was fortunate I met Pradeep on a train, and he said, okay, I'll show you some interesting Delhi. And he took me to Mangar forest in 2005, and Mangar is beautiful. It took my breath away, that really, this is what Delhi was. Anyone of you been to Mangar? Mangar, Bani? Okay. So it's just beautiful. You can have this kind of canopy in Delhi too. Delhi is manicured, the gardens are manicured, but the sense of wilderness that you get in Mangar is not, it's not common, it's a forest. And it drew my attention to forest and forest gardening. And we both worked together in various projects around the country as well as in Delhi. And I realized that we need to work on Aravlis, which we are losing fast. And Delhi is Aravli. Most of the Delhi is Aravli, which we are losing to encroachment, to fragmentation, to our greed, to whatnot. We all know about Prosopis juliflora, how it was introduced. this Prosopis juliflora is this Vilaiti kikar, the ridge that we see behind the president's house and estate. That was brought in by British. It was a wonder tree because it could colonize these rocky habitats. Many trees were brought in, and Sundar Nursery is one good example of how trees from all over the world was brought in to see what is going to do best, and Prosopis juliflora flourished. It flourished how that it colonized whole of India, from Punjab all the way to Tamil Nadu, it flourished. But the detrimental side of, till then the science of course was not so developed in terms of forestry science, that what is the detrimental effect of all this? So we lost a huge biodiversity. If I tell you today there are 70 species of trees in northern Aravalli, I mean, I don't know if you would appreciate it, but I think it's a huge number. In Shivalik you will have 100 plus, or maybe a little more than that. But just trees we have 70 plus. In this semi-arid or arid ecosystem you have so many trees. As we talk today, there are 400 plus birds in Delhi. From flamingos, the greater flamingos, to bar-headed geese, to little lesser white throats, all are here, And of course, this is a winter season, so they are migrating. But you have Surajpur, you have, when I say Delhi, I'm looking into the whole of NCR. I'm not just restricting it to Delhi as district, yeah. So Surajpur, go to Najafgarh, go to Wajirpur. The water is still clean. You'll be surprised. Water is still clean, you can still take bath in that water. And it enters Delhi and it's, sorry to use the word, screwed. And now when I look at the forests of Delhi, there is sense of wonder. There is something to celebrate because there is hope, because there is potential. Because not only just Aravallis, look at the whole Yamuna stretch. We have built roads, we have built highways, we have built metro, and we have done compensatory planting all over Yamuna. First it started with eucalyptus, then with Arjun, then with Jamun, and you have eucalyptus in like 5 feet. These tall giants, eucalyptus are amongst the tallest trees in the world. They are 5 feet apart in the name of compensatory planting, They are not creating forests. They are not creating forests. We are doing 1 million tree a day projects in Delhi. We are doing, many million trees over so many years. It's not creating forest. DDA is not, of course for its 2 projects, which is Aravalli Biodiversity Park in Vasant Kunj and the Yamuna Biodiversity Park, which are really, really admirable work that they have done. Apart from that, DDA is not creating ecology because they don't know. You pick up any horticulturist, in fact, I often, have this debate with the horticulturist. They say, what is the aversion with this, so to say, exotic species, Gul Mohar, what is the problem with Gul Mohar? What is the problem with your jacaranda? I say, okay, I have no problem, but at least, can you appreciate the forest species? Do you know forest species? Do you know Boswellia serrata? Do you know Indian frankincense? If you want to create a space, why don't you bring the species which you don't know, which are of this region? Do you know of Lania coromandelica? Do you know of Flacotia indica? And their eyes open because they don't know, because they have not seen. Because even in Lodi Garden, today also, like 2 days, 3 days back, I went to the back lanes and I saw Barleria, white Barleria, which I'm sure nobody notices. And it's high time that we can highlight them, show them to the world that they are very pretty. They are best adapted. There is millions of years of adaptation to this. Sorry, I'm going to go a little all over, and you will excuse me for that. But so there is this bird, 400 plus species. We have leopards in Delhi. Bombay is not the only city which can talk about leopards. We have leopards in Delhi also. The last record of lions, I don't know how true it is, but was 1840. Not very far, isn't it? And I'm sure if we can create a corridor all the way from your central ridge to the southern ridge, to the Aravali Biodiversity Park, Gurgaon, to Manesar, which I'm fortunate there is another 300 acres that we are trying to rewild, and to Alwar, we might have tigers. You know, if there is a will, if there is a political will, and that's my dream, if people can come together and we create a corridor such that if tigers can come to a certain point and maybe leopards can come to the central ridge, I mean, done, job is done. So I was talking about these exotic and native species. There is a new thought now. Young people are coming together, CSC, CEC of Sola. They want to create a nursery of native plants. Forest department is keen. कहाँ लोगे, कौन सी नर्सरी लोगे? ऐसा करो आप 100 नर्सरीज में से थोड़ी-थोड़ी जगह ले लो, कुछ स्पीशीज लगा लेना उसमें. But they are talking about native species. Either there is so much public pressure, or there is an understanding. I don't blame the forest department, because these guys come from Arunachal or Andamans, where they have seen such incredible forests. Here they say, where are the forests? You know, and what is there to manage? But when you look deeply, there is so much to appreciate and cherish and to preserve. So there is a whole community of young people and old people happening, which are birders. Yesterday, there were 12 groups which went all over the NCR counting birds. It was called a bird race. And some of them counted 183 species, someone counted 150 species. You know, 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, they were counting. Sorry. So there is a community of people who are appreciating nature. And we, as civilization, can only exist. And I don't know, there is a strange conviction in me which says can only exist if we appreciate and preserve nature. You know, it gives us a sense of belonging. It gives us a sense of comfort. It is the place where wilderness is the place where we have solitude and a sense of me, which is all encompassing. So yeah, if you want to continue into discussion, we will do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aman, Ayesha, and Vijay. This has been really insightful, as expected actually, because one thing that I would like to begin this discussion. One strand of thinking that came in all three presentations is this lack of knowledge. All the three of you referred to this, like while you're talking about intangible heritage or linguistic cultures or environment, you have this lack of knowledge, and on the one hand, and there is the other side, there is this governance thing, which you're going ahead and making administrative reforms, or making a kind of administrative measures. So there is a divide suddenly, because it's not informed enough. So maybe we can start this discussion, like we have some time for discussion, maybe 10 minutes of. So I would like you, all of you, to comment on this, like as to what we can do. Like the question is, how do we go about it,
Knowledge is very important, but I think there's also hope in all the people, I think, except what I spoke about, because, if more and more density of population and bottlenecks, all the built heritage, so I don't know where the hope is. The hope can only be if we have very original thinking, and instead of making skyscrapers, we start thinking of making earth scrapers. I don't know if you've read in Mexico, in the square where they were very short of space, they built a skyscraper downwards. And on the edge of the Aravalis, I built actually an underground step well where you can live. So if you don't want to spoil Delhi, and if people must still live in a warm place, then I think we should consider underground architecture on above which we can have forests where people can speak all the languages they want. No?
I would like to add actually, because the project I'm doing, which is 350 acres of a mining site, it's government of Haryana, MCG, Municipal Corporation of Gurgaon land, done by NGO, which has very strong community presence, because they invite children, you know, all walks of life. Some 63 corporates kind of come and volunteer in that park. And I tell you, every commissioner change, there is challenge. Because with every commissioner comes a new idea. Someone wants to create a night safari, someone wants to create a crocodile park, someone wants to replicate Singapore gardens or, you know, Kew Gardens or whatnot. But the community comes forward. You know, yeah. And the community comes forward and says no. They run petition saying that we want it as wild as it can get, you know, and not a night safari, not a crocodile park or a zoo. So there is hope. Of course, governments are limited in terms of excellence, because excellence is a big challenge for governments, because we are still striving for existence of firefighting, and excellence is way far in any field.
I said perhaps a zoo of politicians would be good in a forest. Lots of us could go to see them.
I certainly think on matters of environment, so linguists, you know, a lot of the world's languages are tremendously under threat. And one of the arguments we give for the smallest community, because to you know, be protected and fostered, is because they are the ones who know the life cycle of the environment that they live in. They know when the birds they will lay eggs. So with this very famous book called Vanishing Voices, which looked at Hawaiian communities and the way that they have mapped there. Now, in places where cities are actually eating away habitats, gentrification, and where, for example, Horse Khas village or all of these have become fancy places now. I think that there has to be, you cannot conserve environment or structures without looking at livelihood and participation of people. So ideas like, so while there is of course hope comes from people. I think it doesn't come, and people's involvement. And I think the challenge in Delhi, now let's face it, I don't think that any of us are politicians, but the politicians are people too, I think, and they are the ones who can talk to people. So it is important to bring progressive agendas to the population. So I think that, it's important that...
But our hope is only in the paper reports and, whatever, made by people who are uninformed. So the first person...
No, I think a more participative democracy
absolutely.
is what we need, where these concerns, which have not been concerns of democracies everywhere, should be foregrounded.
So in Mangar, it's the Gujars, isn't it? Yeah.
In terms of language, like I come from mountains, and first thing that we Pahadis drop when you come to Delhi is our language.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a sign of, and there is another guy called Wanchuk from Ladakh, I'm forgetting his name, met many years back.
The king.
And, yeah, he was running some schools, and he said, we are teaching Ladakhi and English because he says English gives them a sense of pride. Ladakhi, we want to give them to, ground them into the culture. And as a party, I know for sure, as a parent, first thing that you ask your children is to drop your language, because it doesn't give you that sense of pride. So if you want to, if you can reflect on this, it will be nice.
You see, what needs to change, so there is both of these things. So language is dropped, but linguistic identity doesn't go. And that's actually more dangerous, because in that sense, it's just a fig leaf that you are wearing. And you say, oh, I'm a Santali, but I don't speak Santali. I'm a Pahari, I don't speak Pahari. Now, wherever there has been language maintenance, and I think we should all look to the Bengalis for doing an amazing job, right, for centuries. Because how they teach
But
language.
they're proud about it, you
they're
see.
proud of
if
it,
you talk
even
to a
if they're in the-
Punjabi in Punjabi, he answers in Hindi. Because it's a sign, do you think I'm uncivilized that you're speaking to me in Punjabi, you know? So it doesn't come from pride.
Yeah, so where does it come from? You know, it's because I think...
Also from being colonized, I think.
Well, they were equally colonized. But when you do prestige building of languages, that's very important. And that's the responsibility of states. So supposing, I know that there is, you know, the central government employees are very interesting. So the beautiful language from Himachal, Gaddi, right? They have a Gaddika association. They do, you know, they have the central government employees. And they celebrate, not some of their children. There are young speakers of Gaddi, even in Delhi, and there are lots of
No, but which is why you have Samanvay, I suppose. You know?
But I think that this is very top level, because the, you know, and it's great that, you know, you can bring these issues to the top. That's so, but I'm saying that in the slum, right, where there are lots and lots of speakers from Rajasthan, why is it not the case that the Delhi government can fund a night of music? Why doesn't it have poetry recitations? All people come with their traditions, they don't leave them behind.
Absolutely.
So we need to prestige plan. These are not small languages. They are very big languages with vibrant cultures. You announce a poetry reading or you announce a play competition. Why do you believe? Like similarly, why, you know, if you're going to do ornithology, and if it's very difficult in Delhi to find communities settled in one place, especially places because they're always constantly...
No, but I think efforts are happening. Now this I Love Delhi campaign, they've asked for poetry in Urdu, English and Hindi,
Again,
Punjabi, and it's
elite
interesting.
languages. I'm saying that this
No,
is...
no, but at least, you know, somewhere, at least...
No, that's fair, but you see, unless you have, I think, a grassroots level approach.
And fast, because it'll be lost also. Yeah.
There is Dr. Anjali Kapila sitting here. She has a work on folk songs of Garhwal. And, you know,
Don't we have a
how,
dance at
how
7
in
o'clock?
songs there is culture. And there is, I mean, people, before this panel, there was so much talk about it. And so there is work happening. There is Mountain Voices funded by UN, one of the UN bodies, where people are coming out with oral testimonies of, and sense of pride, I think, sense of pride, which is very important in language as well as in carrying the culture forward.
The situation in the city, and particularly this city, is very pernicious, right? So, you know, in the mountains, people live in small communities. There's actually very high language maintenance. In the city, where you have a culture of disrespecting other languages, and we do have that in our city, and people are not necessarily in the same connection with nature and, you know, their habitat. It's very important that the instruments that we use to deliver social art. So if I can ask for Ayesha, this is not to overly politicize something, but I think one should realize. So I just, if I may just change the topic a little bit and tell you the story that I have learned in the book that I translated about Nizamuddin Dargah. It's a very interesting story. My grandmother was involved in, you know, the anti-communal activism of 1947-48 in Delhi, so she memoirs Badrail. In, I think, 1948, the Nizamuddin Dargah was handed over to the custodian of evacuee property. And they decided that it was entirely belonged. So therefore, the Dargah was to be demolished and to build houses in Nizamuddin Dargah, because Hazrat Nizamuddin wasn't there, so he must have gone to Pakistan, so the entire property belonged there. The Arab Sarai Institute was, you know, was built on the Qabristan, which is great. I mean, I don't have any, but the Arab Sarai Institute. So there was no consciousness these are old buildings. Refugees and poor people were planted not only on the streets, but in every religious building. It's, you know, in Delhi. The Shahi Mardan here was also taken over. So that we cannot disengage what happens in architecture, in conservation, and in language from the politics of the time. So it's very important to recognize that when we have intolerance, that you're actually compromising much more than you can think. Then, then you will know, and you will know, like we know from your talk, that it's 50 years later.
Sorry.
What a great loss it's been.
Can we now open it to the audience, and maybe there are some questions? One couple of questions.
I think my mic is working now.
Should not two questions. Can you switch off
Yes, I know.
that light, because they won't be able to see who's asking.
Yes, hello. Madam, I think, you spoke on, on languages, and I think, I find your account racist and imperialist. You don't even bother to locate the geography, the linguistic geography of Delhi. It's in the middle Yamuna basin, and a democratic discourse on this subject has to identify the language of this area. As far as I'm concerned, both Hindi and Urdu are problematic, because Hindi effectively means hordes of migrants from the East, and this is evident in Hindi journalism, which is largely in the hands of people from Awadh, Bihar, and so forth. And Urdu also effectively has become a vehicle of migrants from, the East, Muslim migrants. So, both are problematic. And if you want a democratic conception for the speech of Delhi, then I think you have to sort of identify what is the speech of this area. Just talking about the speech of a particular kasbah or a, like Nizamuddin, it's a mere kasbah, that cannot be the language of this area. So you have to sort of democratically identify the middle Yamuna, the Delhi Yamuna basin, what is the speech there, and if you have any sort of democratic conviction, then plead for or advocate the speech of that sort of speech as the speech of this area. So, I find it a racist idea of trying to harken back to an imperialist past and seeking to restore it.
I'm sorry, I can't see where you're speaking from, but I think that politeness and civility is always the rule of order, really. And just because I have not advocated at all, the installation of any particular language. And certainly not Hindi or Urdu but your claim that there is something that languages have lives outside people is, I think, just as physically impossible. So there's no language of an area. There's a language of the people who live in an area. The people who live in an area change. So I cannot define what was there. I do not think that there is a language which is outside people. And I said repeatedly that actually the unit of analysis is multilingualism, so that we cannot build a story about what is the language of the middle Gangetic basin if there are no speakers left. That's true democracy, I think, which looks at and attends to the needs and the aspirations and the identities and the realities of citizens. I have no desire to say that Delhi has one language at all. And certainly when I was talking about Nizamuddin, I was not talking about the language of a kasbah.
I think we are really running short of time, so thank you very much, Aman, Ayesha, and Vijay. We would like to continue all these discussions which we've initiated in this year's Samanvay in the months to come and years to come, because these are not questions that